this is what everything looks like, stacked up and ready to press. Alright guys, what we got here is a 2004 Chevy Trailblazer with a 4.2 liter four-wheel drive. Today we're going to be changing the lower ball joint. I previously changed the upper ball joint when I did the strut assemblies. I got a video uploaded showing how to change the strut assemblies, and I changed the sway bar links in that same video. So if you're looking to do that, just look at my other videos on my channel. But today's focus is mainly this lower ball joint. However, I am going to be changing the inner tie rod at the same time because it failed for inspection, as well as the brake pads. In order to do the lower ball joint, you're going to need a ball joint press kit like this. I was able to rent this at Advanced Auto Parts, my local parts store. I'm sure O'Reilly's or somewhere like that rents it too. It's a kit 648-617 by Powerbuilt. These are the that's the part number for the lower ball joint right there. If you need an inner tie rod, there's the part number for that. Also your brake pads, the part number for that. I already put some disc brake quiet on those because it's got to sit for about 10 minutes. So the tools you'll see me use in the video are 1/2-inch drive ratchet, 3/8 drive ratchet, 15mm wrench, a 7/8 wrench for the ball joint press. I'm going to be using a flat blade screwdriver, 3-pound hammer, 36mm socket, a 24mm socket, a 22mm socket, a 15mm socket, a 13mm socket, a 10mm socket, also the pipe wrench, the zip tie tool, and the Loctite for the inner tie rod. But the rest of the stuff is ball joint related. Also a torque wrench and a 19mm extension. You're going to need that to retorque your wheels afterwards. So I think that covers it. Yeah, my crutches because I broke my leg, so I'm on the tail end of that. At least I can bend it. Let's go ahead and get started here. So the first thing we're going to tackle here is we're going to get this axle nut off. It's the 36mm. We're going to use the 1/2-inch drive ratchet for that. The rotor is going to want to spin, so either you need to have somebody hold the brake pedal for you while you take this off, or you can loosen it up before you jack the vehicle up after you take the center cap off your wheel, or you can take a large screwdriver and stick it inside the fins of your rotor to hold it that way. This is about 100 foot-pounds or so of torque. I think it's 103 foot-pounds in the manual, so you could have a little trouble getting it off. You can always put a pipe on the end of your ratchet here. Just be careful. If you don't have a pipe, the lower half of my jack handle worked pretty good for that. So I'm going to go ahead and get this taken off, and I'll come right back. Just a quick note. This is a locking type nut, so you're not going to be able to just turn it with your fingers. Once it gets loose, you're going to have to use the ratchet to get it I'd say 90% of the way before you're able to actually get it the rest of the way with your fingers. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is get these two 10mm nuts here that hold this bracket that holds the brake hose to your caliper, because we want to make sure we have enough slack to relocate the caliper out of the way, because this whole arm is going to have to come off. So we're also going to have to disconnect the ABS sensor here and make sure we get it all the clips out on that, so that way we have no problems. We don't want to break that line, so that's loose. We'll get this loose, and I'll come right back. Now that we have this bracket off and we have the ABS cable disconnected, we can go ahead and take our caliper off and set it over here out of the way. That's going to be 13mm nut here, and then another 13mm nut here to get this caliper off. So go ahead and get this off, and we'll set it out of the way. Alright, and if your caliper doesn't want to pull up, very easy. You can just go ahead and gently get in here with a screwdriver and just kind of pry it up, and then it should come free. And we'll go ahead and set that right out of the way. Get these brake pads off here. You know, there's still a little bit of life left in those, but since we're here and they're cheap, we're just going to go ahead and change them. So once I got the caliper off, I got it zip tied out of the way up here, so that way the caliper doesn't fall and put stress on the brake hose here. And next we're going to go ahead and get this 24mm nut off the bottom of the lower ball joint. So we'll go ahead and get this off, and I'll come right back. Once we get the nut off the lower ball joint, we're going to head to disconnect the tie rod. So in order to get this 22mm here, we got to get rid of this cotter pin first. We get this pulled out of the way here, and that'll allow us to get a socket on it. Might have to use a little pair of pliers or something here. No, should be good to go. All right, I'll get this 22 on here and get this thing off, and I'll come right back. Once you get that 22 millimeter castle nut off here, off this tie rod, you're going to want to get the tie rod out. Now, to get it out of this arm, people are tempted to just hit this. That's bad because you're going to mess your threads up. And if you use a pickle fork, that's bad because it's going to rip your boot. So what you want to do, the easiest way to do this is to take your 3-pound hammer, and you want to strike right there. Give it a couple good raps, and it should pop right out. And there, see, comes right out. Good to go. All right, my next step is to get the tie rod completely off so I can change the inner tie rod. It's definitely bad. It has a lot of play. So I got to do that. If you're not changing your inner tie rod, you can just fast forward a little bit, and we'll continue taking this steering knuckle off. All right, to get this inner tie rod loose from the rack here, they make a tool for this. It kind of like fits these grooves here, and you know, you can use that, but the pipe wrench works just as well. Most people have a pipe wrench kicking around. There is usually thread lock compound on these, so it's going to be a little tough, but you should be able to just get it loose with that, and it should come right off. To separate the inner tie rod from the outer tie rod, we're just going to use the pipe wrench again to hold, and we're going to use a 7/8 wrench to turn here, just to loosen up that jam nut. You don't want to relocate this jam nut too far. You want to just unthread the inner tie rod. Leave this right here as a reference for when you thread your new one on. You're still probably going to have an alignment done on the vehicle, but if you don't mess with this too much, you should be able to still track straight going down the road. So we'll get this unthreaded, and we'll get the new one threaded on. Once you have the new tie rod end threaded on, just go ahead and use a 7/8 and the pipe wrench again to tighten down that jam nut, and then we'll be ready to thread this back in. Alright, before you thread the tie rod back into the steering rack, you want to just apply just a small amount of a thread locker. You don't need a lot. And then just go ahead and get this threaded back into the steering rack here. Again, to tighten this up, you just want to get in here and use your pipe wrench and get it good and tight, and go ahead and get the boot back on. Get it zip tied. Now that we have the tie rod put back in, zip ties on the boot here, we're gonna go ahead and get the pinch joint up here undone. This is with a 15 millimeter wrench and a 15 millimeter ratchet. So we'll work on getting this out here. Once you have the nut all the way loose, leave it flush. You can give it a few taps with a 3-pound hammer to drive it out that way, to allow you to get it completely out. When you want to take this out, this is going to want to come up at the same time. There's tension on this right now. I can't pull it out. So you might want to support the arm, because the arm's going to try to tip forward when this pops up. And you're going to have to take a screwdriver and the hammer and tap this bolt out and just drive it out. And you can see that popped up, and this arm wants to just tip forward a little bit. Once you get the top free, to get this bottom loose, it's going to be the same method we used on the tie rod. You're going to want to take your 3-pound hammer, you want to give it a couple sharp raps right about here, and then this arm's going to want to come down, and it's pretty heavy. So if you want, you can put a jack underneath here down a little ways to catch this arm when it falls down. So we'll go ahead and get the jack set up. All right, with the jack in position, we'll go ahead and give this a few taps and see if it comes down. Just like that. So now she's down. We can slowly release the jack, because we're going to want to push the push your CV shaft out, and we can get the whole arm down. So now that we have the whole entire steering knuckle out of the way, we can see the lower ball joint. You can see this one has some play. We're going to have to use our press to press this out. So we grabbed the 2 3/4 receiver cup here. the press plates, and they called this the remover. So I'll go ahead and get that stacked up and show you what it looks like, and we'll start pressing this out. This is what everything looks like, stacked up and ready to press. You can use a 7/8 wrench on here, but it also fits a 22mm socket. That way there, I'm able to actually put the pipe on this to turn it, because it's going to take an awful lot of pressure to press that ball joint out. So you do this at your own risk. I'm not responsible for any bodily injury. When that does let go, it's going to pop, so just be careful. And I guess this one's there. There we go. Alright, now that we've got the old ball joint out of the way, we get ready to press the new ball joint in. There's a marking on here that says mount inbound. It's so when the grease comes out, when you're greasing it, it keeps it away from your rotor. So you want to make sure that that's facing in, like it says. We're going to use the 2 1/4 receiving cup there, and we use the what is it, the 2.5 inch ring out of the kit with just the top press. We're not going to use this piece here because this piece has the indent to sit in here. We'll get this set up and I'll show you what it looks like stacked up and ready to press. So this is what everything looks like when it's all stacked and ready to press. So we'll go ahead and start pressing this. Just make sure that everything looks like it's going to press nice and even, straight. As you can see, when you're ratcheting, it's pretty tight, so once again, you might have to use the pipe on the ratchet for some leverage. You want to make sure you get it pressed in so that way it's flush right here. Once again, just be careful what you're doing. There's a lot of pressure on this. Once you feel it bottom out, it's going to get really tight, and then back the press off, and we should be good. All right, now that we have the ball joint pressed in, you can see the groove. It's nice and flush. These ball joints come with a snap ring. I have snap ring pliers. I know I didn't show them in the beginning of the video. If you don't have snap ring pliers, you could just set it on here, stick your flathead in, and twist just to get it locked on. But we're going to use the snap ring pliers just to spread the snap ring and get it to set down in the groove, and it should snap in just like that. With the snap ring in place, we can go ahead and pry off the cap, and we can go ahead and get the grease fitting threaded in here. So it's going to be a 10mm. Once again, sorry I didn't show the 10mm wrench in the first part of the video, but you want to make sure that this is twisting around and orientated in such a way that you're able to grease this right about there without having to take everything apart. So have it face towards the rear. I just wanted to show you guys real quick. This is another Moog ball joint with the same snap ring setup. It presses in and out just like the bottom with the ball joint press. However, I already did this one, so I'm not going to be doing this one today. Alright, so we're going to get this arm put back up in here, and before we do, we're going to spray inside that hole on the bottom there where it's all grease, and we're going to spray this guy here with some brake clean just so it has bite when we go to put this back up and it doesn't spin on us when we try to tighten the nut. Alright, want to be ready with our castle nut. This is pretty heavy, so you want to try to get the CV shaft lined up and get your hole back here with the ball joint lined up. Get everything lined up, slide it up, and then hold it, and then start your castle nut. Once you get that started, you can set the assembly down for a second, take a breath, get your ratchet on here, and then ratchet it tight. With the bottom all set and tightened down as much as you can for now, we're going to head and get the top reassembled. We put a jack underneath the control arm and brought it up enough to compress some of the coil here. Just be careful you don't take the car off the jack stands. If you jack it up too much, it's going to take the weight of the car. You don't want that. You just want to compress this enough to get this close. You want to make sure that you have your bolt ready to go. You can stick it in about a 1/2 inch or so, and then line this up. You got to kind of squeeze with both hands, hold it with one hand, tap down with the hammer while pushing in on this bolt here to get that top one in. And once it's in, it'll hold for you, and you should be able to go ahead and put your nut on and get that tightened down. All right, so again, you're going to use a wrench and the ratchet, one to hold and one to turn. The torque spec on this is only 30 foot-pounds. The next thing we're going to do is reattach the tie rod to the steering knuckle. Same thing, we want to make sure this is all grease free, so we're going to give this a little squirt of brake clean down in the hole. We're not going to spray that directly because we don't want brake clean to go down inside the boot, so we're going to spray a little on a paper towel, and we're just going to wipe this shaft here to make sure that it's grease free, so that way it doesn't spin out when we try to get it up in here to tighten down the nut. So we'll take the 22mm castle nut, we'll put this on here, and we're going to torque this down. When we get it on here, we're going to torque the 22mm castle nut to 42 foot-pounds, and then we're going to reinsert the cotter pin. Now, sometimes you can hear your torque wrench clicking, and you check, and you can see that you're not quite far enough over to insert your cotter pin in the hole, so you're going to have to go just a little bit more and just keep checking until you can get your cotter pin through the hole. So right about there, and now you can see we can go ahead and get our cotter pin back in the hole here. With the castle nut secured to 42 foot-pounds and the cotter pin back in, we're going to go ahead and let the jack down now, and then we're going to go ahead and torque the lower ball joint 22mm. We're going to torque that to 80 foot-pounds. All right, you can see we were lucky on this one. When it clicked 80 foot-pounds, it lined up good, so we can get our cotter pin inside that castle nut, and then we're done with that. And then we got to get our brakes put on. All right, while we still have our press handy here, we're taking an old pad with these dual piston calipers. We're going to press the calipers back in, both pistons all at once. So with the caliper successfully remounted, we put our 10mm bracket bolts back in here holding the brake hose. We got our connection back for our ABS cable, and now we just got to go ahead and put on the 36mm axle nut here. We got our screwdriver back in to the caliper on this side now because we're tightening, and we'll go ahead and torque this down to 103 foot-pounds. All right, so once we get this torqued down right there to 103 foot-pounds, we can take this out. We'll go ahead and put our wheels and tires back on, torque your lug nuts to, I believe it's 105. You can double check your owner's manual for that. Thank you guys for watching the video. If it helped you in any way, please give me a thumbs up, let me know in the comments, and subscribe to my channel for future Trailblazer videos. Thanks.